Welcome back to Normal Island. I'm Curtis Daly, and I'm joined by good friend of the show, Helena, aka No Justice MTG. How are we doing? I mean, it's been a couple of weeks since you've been on the show, but it feels like so much longer.
Oh my god, the news just doesn't stop.
It doesn't,
History
does it?
clearly, Fukuyama in the mud. History continuing forever, and we are along for the ride. I'm not doing too bad actually. I have had a dentist appointment today though, so luckily my face has just started feeling things again. So I'm all good to do the show tonight.
I mean, we were just talking backstage about how expensive it is to go to the dentist, so
Oh dear lord.
I know. That's a story for another time. Now, coming up on tonight's show, we've got media scrutiny on Zach Polansky has started. Labour's trade deal gives tax breaks for Indian workers, and India and Pakistan looks to be on the verge of war. As always, remember to like the stream, and if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button. Help us reach our goal of 40,000 subscribers by the end of the year. We'll be getting to your comments, as you know, at the end, so please make sure you're also busy in the chats. But on to our first story. Earlier this week, Zach Polansky announced that he is running to be the Green Party leader. A pretty big news story to start off the week. It's been 3 days, and he's already featured in the Jewish Chronicle twice. Green leadership candidate denies that Labour was rife with anti-Semitism under Corbyn. Addressing the issue on Navarra's YouTube channel, Polansky said Jeremy Corbyn at the time was talking about pockets of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. He went on to say that although Corbyn hadn't handled the issue perfectly, it was not helpful for me to assume that the Labour Party was rife with anti-Semitism when we now know that blatantly was not true. Polansky also said that his experience of attacks from often the Jewish Chronicle and other so-called mainstream Jewish organisations meant that he had a new appreciation for what Jeremy Corbyn was dealing with at the time. Now, Polansky didn't waste any time, and he clapped straight back. 2 days into a leadership campaign, and the Jewish Chronicle have written 2 articles about me. See you again tomorrow, lads. I mean, you love to see it. Now, Zach in that tweet talked about this being the second article about him, so I decided to find the first one, which I did, and the last paragraph I thought was pretty interesting. During last year's general election campaign, after the JC had revealed extreme anti-Israel social media activity by Green candidates who were later dropped, Polansky denied that the party vetting had a problem and said any suggestion that it had a problem with anti-Semitic candidates would be a huge overstretch. A Green Party local councillor who was elected to lead City Council last May celebrated his win by shouting Allahu Akbar. Now, why would they tag that bit about the councillor at the end there? I mean, he said Allahu Akbar. It literally means God is great, right? Seemingly, the suggestion here is expressing your Islamic faith is anti-Israel. Now, the segment in Navarra was in reference to a tweet Polansky made years back criticising Jeremy Corbyn, to which was put to him by Michael Walker. I'm a pro-European Jew. It's increasingly clear that 2 reasons I couldn't vote for Labour under Jeremy Corbyn. And I think it was fair that that was brought up to Zach by Michael. Helena, listening to Zach's answer, saying he has a new appreciation for Corbyn, do you think that was a good answer? Did you believe him?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I thought that it was well put. That especially in 2018, when the media sphere broadly had all just accepted prima facie, it was received wisdom that there was anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn himself was a terrorist sympathiser, and that he didn't take a strong enough whip hand with regards to anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. If you were a casual observer at the time, or even if you were somebody who was at least interested in politics to keep track of things without knowing all the nitty-gritty ins and outs of what's happening on a granular level in the Labour Party, especially if you're a Jewish person and you are rightly going to be alert to potential anti-Semitism wherever it may be, because that's something that directly affects you. I think it would be very easy to get caught up in the media narrative on this. I think there are plenty of good, well-meaning people, regardless of background, at the time, who just continually heard things such as Labour is anti-Semitic under Jeremy Corbyn, and would have just believed it because, why would the press lie? Of course, that is something that over time we've become a lot more appreciative of, and says why we need a Leveson too. But I think I have plenty of sympathy with Zach for saying, well, this is what we were told at the time, but now that I've looked into it, I feel like, and since I've been on the other end of it, I've had much greater appreciation. I think this also goes a lot further than just people like Zach Polanski as well. I think there are probably quite a lot of people in this country. They may not have a positive view of Jeremy Corbyn nowadays anyway, but specifically on his position over Israel-Palestine and the media's smearing of him as being anti-Semitic because of those positions, in the wake of October the 7th, in the wake of Al-Aqsa flood, in the wake of what's happened since Israel has invaded, genocided, and attempted to annex the Gaza Strip, and all the things that people have seen on their phones, on their cameras, all of the knowledge that they have now gained about Israel because it's been clear for the world to see. You just have to hit translate tweet on Twitter to know what Israelis say about Palestinians when they think people aren't watching. They now have a better appreciation of what Jeremy Corbyn stood for. The Israel-Palestine issue was a niche opinion, a niche cause in 2017, 2019. But in 2025, everyone in the country has an opinion, and more people than ever realize the reality of Zionism, the reality of what Israel does. I'm not spoken to Zach to confirm that this is exactly what he thinks, but I think probably his opinion of Israel has changed a lot, especially over the last 5 years, and certainly since Al-Aqsa flood in 2023. So for him to say, I got it wrong, I took a broader opinion that was told to me, but now I've looked into it further, I can understand the nuances of the position, is something that is broadly shared amongst a lot of different people. Now they've seen Israel for what it is. So I fully take on board what he said, and I think that this is the best answer that he could have given to try and allay concerns over the kind of politician and the kind of politics he represented in 2018 and how different that is now. I mean, the guy goes to like Bundist meetings with, there was the Jewish Socialist Association or whatever it's called. I forget the exact name. Like, you don't go to these things unless you have a genuine, sincere belief in the causes of those groups. And I fully support the position that he's taken in the wake of these attacks on him for being a pro-Palestinian Jewish person who's running to be a party leader, and the comments that he's made previously about other people from that position.
Yeah, and look, I've this has come out probably a handful of times over the last year or so, and I've said, look, at the end of the day, he's also a politician. He's a Green Party politician. Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party. He was deputy leader, or at least involved in the Green Party. It's a kind of a factional thing as well. So he doesn't, and this is not excusing him, but he doesn't have an incentive like maybe me or you did when we really backed Jeremy Corbyn to look at the fine details and see this is what the factional wars were happening inside the Labour Party. This is how it's weaponized. That's one possible explanation. Another one is, I suppose being Jewish as well, hearing the media about it. I think it's possible. I think it's even likely that people are going to find Jeremy Corbyn's leadership skeptical because of the noise of it. I think it was quite. I think it was very. He showed humility actually, because if you haven't seen, I'm sure you've seen it, but those watching, if you haven't seen the interview at Novara Media, go watch it, because in that bit, I think Michael asks him two questions. One about that one, but then something about Brexit, right? But Zach Polanski goes, "I want to address this question head on," so he didn't try and avoid it. So. Look, I personally believe him, but also, we don't have to. I think one of the mistakes that we had probably after Jeremy Corbyn was looking at one person and think we're going to ride all on this one guy, right? We can look at Zach Polanski and think, look, at the end of the day, the policies aren't what matters. We don't need to, inundate ourselves with this man. We can just say, this is a man at a particular time, potentially becoming a leader of a particular party. We care about the policies and the vision. We don't need to completely like the guy, although I have a lot of respect for him. We of course knew, obviously the JC attacked him twice, even the Guardian sort of attacked him. We knew these kind of articles were going to happen. I wouldn't say they're full-on attacks yet, but I did like Zach's sarcastic jab at the JC. Do you think Zach does actually have what it takes to take on these inevitable attacks and be the aggressive populist leader that we need?
Time will only tell, but it's a good start. It's a good start to go to these people, and rather than try and placate them, rather than try and take their cynical attacks as if they're in any way sincere or as if they have any basis to them, and try and repudiate them on the grounds of their terrain that they want to fight on. No, you should dismiss these people. Dismiss these people out of hand. These people are partisan hacks. I do not need to care about whatever these people's opinions are. But notice why they're doing these things. It's because they're scared of me. You know, they could attack me on the foundational principles of the things that I believe, but instead they're going with, I made a mistake one time when I was a hypnotherapist, and I take a position on Israel that is different from the received wisdom of what Jewish people in this country are supposed to believe. When, of course, actually the support for what's happening in Israel, I mean, Zionism more broadly, the support for is dropping amongst the Jewish community in this UK over time, and indeed support for the actions of Israel, specifically within the context of what's happened since Al-Aqsa flood. Like that specifically, that doesn't really have much support at all. Maybe they support Israel, but they don't support what's the actions of the Israeli government right now, the genocide they don't support. So the idea that he should take these attacks from these institutions in good faith, and he's not accepting these things as good faith. He's already dismissing them as bad faith out of hand, and that's the absolute correct strategy. That's what Nigel Farage does when everyone tries to say, "Well, you can't be critical of immigration without being racist," and he goes, "Come on, like, these attacks are childish. Debate me on the substance of the policy or the substance of the things that I believe, right?" And whilst you may have concerns that Reform UK voters or Reform UK members or whatever might have anti-immigration positions that are based in racism, that's not a way of attacking the things that he says. It's a useless strategy of being able to take on what he believes. And what's interesting too is the dismissal of the claims that the Green Party has an anti-Semitism problem because people were removed as candidates because of things they said on social media. And I remember covering the things that people said. I think there was like one comment that you probably said was anti-Semitic, right? That's one person out of 650, who cares? But on top of this, a lot of the other ones were just support for the Palestinian cause. Because we know what like ultra-Zionists believe about the Palestinian cause. Remember Melanie Phillips saying that anyone who supports the Palestinian cause is engaging in anti-Semitism? That's what a lot of ultra-Zionists genuinely believe. And that's where a lot of these critiques, in my mind, come from. It is this: well, you support the Palestinians, therefore you must be anti-Semitic, for example, and therefore a Jew who takes that position is someone you can instantly attack. In terms of Zach Polanski, but in terms of Green Party members, like Zach's like, no, dismiss this out of hand. No, these people just are pro-Palestinian. We had people saying pro-Palestinian things on Twitter. I don't care. And quite frankly, good. I'm glad that he's taking this line. There's no reason to treat these people with anything other than disdain when all they do is do politically motivated attack pieces on you. And again, someone on Twitter made another really good point here, which was that the instant response you go is, "Where's your critique of Peter Mandelson?" Especially when it's The Guardian.
And
Pippa
it
Carrera,
shut her
right?
up completely.
Literally, like, where's your critique, not just of Peter Mandelson's company that he keeps, but in terms of what he's been doing in terms of his business relationships since he's been out of Parliament, right? These people are not squeaky clean. And Aaron Bastani made this point too. If you really want to attack Labour, you've got to go for the jugular, expose them for what they are, talk about their relationships with the TBI and Labour together openly. This is the name Morgan McSweeney is very, very rarely talked about in mainstream media in the way that Dominic Cummings was. Go for the jugular. Get these people to actually discuss just the ways in which the Labour Party work and say, no, let's go on the offensive, right? Turn this back round on these media hacks for being partisan. I think the way he's handled it so far, if that's showing how things are going to be in the months and years to come, then he has my full support.
And I think he will. And if he doesn't, I hope there's advisors around him that tell him to do that. I mean, I remember Ash Sarkar, I remember it was yesterday, Ash Sarkar said, you kind of need to be a shark. You need to go looking for it. And I think part of the problem the left had, part of the problem that Jeremy Corbyn had, was that he was always on a defensive position. Sometimes he could evade the attacks well, but I suppose he was almost waiting for it to happen. You really got to be aggressive and go for it. I think the way that Zach handles himself seems to be quite promising. I mean, I saw a clip from the BBC maybe a year or two ago, and he was asked about these candidate selections. And he did what I call the Bernie Sanders approach, which is he kind of dealt with it at hand and then went immediately to income and wealth inequality, corporations, billionaires and taxes. It's excellent. And I think he needs to do that on every issue. I know this is going to be a completely different topic, so we don't need to hash out now, but there's been some people on the left saying, does he need to capitulate on social issues to be popular? My view is he doesn't need to capitulate, but he needs to do everything by class. Right? He gets asked about what do you think about this culture thing, and he'll go, I don't think it's that important. Anyway, the corporations, the billionaires, keep it on message, and I think he can do the same with these attacks. And I think the way he disparaged the JC was fantastic, and Pippa Creer by saying, what about Epstein or sorry, Peter Mandelson, Freudian slip, was really good. But I think we're going to move on to our
I just want to make the point.
Please come in. Yes, want to hear more.
Before we do move on, but I would say is I think you're absolutely right, because that's been the Sanders strategy for a very, very long time. It's a really great clip of him from the 2000s during the Bush era, talking about how people use cultural issues to divide. And what Sanders always does is clearly state his own position and say, I believe no matter what gender you are, no matter what your background is, no matter what your race or who you love or who you choose to spend your life with, right? I respect you regardless, and that is my position. But the reason we're having these discussions is because they don't want you to talk about the real issues. It's why I think that I really want to discuss. I really want to be on mainstream media and be able to ask these questions like, so, well, you're transgender. What's your opinion on this issue? I'm like, I'm not here to discuss this. You want me to talk about what a woman is at a time when people can't feed their fucking kids. I don't have time for this. I don't have time for this at all. It's been clear for the way in which social conventions work for ages that trans people act in the way that they do, and we don't need to change this at all just because the Supreme Court said something. But that's completely by the by, because it's been an issue that's massively overhyped in the media to high heavens, when we really need to have an actual talk about the issues affecting real people in this country, not the hobby horses of bored middle-class journalists.
Yeah, because obviously the media want to look. I think it's very much understood that the left, when it comes to class issues and economic issues, we are at our strong point there. It's a unifying message, and the right constantly wants to talk about these wedge issues. And I do think it's a mistake to capitulate on them, though, because what you do there is obviously you piss off your own base. I also think it's immoral, but you actually don't pivot away from the conversation. So if Wes Streeton says, it was a mistake that trans women are women and trans men are men, he hasn't actually diverted the conversation. He's continuing that conversation, but he's just saying, I agree with you. I hope that Zach is going to do this, and I think Bernie Sanders is one of the best speakers we've had. He was so inspirational in 2015, 2016, was that he kept it on message. It almost got annoying watching him, but you want to be like that. Even if people go, Zach's a bit annoying because he keeps saying the same thing, it's wedged in your brain, though. The problem is, that your bills are going up is not because of inflation. It's greedflation. It's because the oil barons are making record profits. The billionaires are paying no taxes. Your public services are being siphoned, destroyed because of private contracts. I think when that message gets in, that's the most important thing, especially that Zach Palansky isn't trying to be prime minister. He's only trying to win more seats. So I think he actually has a bit more leverage. When you're trying to be prime minister, there's a kind of a big coalition build, and you do kind of have to be a little bit careful. I think Zach can be even more aggressive in where he is, because he's still kind of on the sideline.
I think that's right, because there's a Politics Show clip that's been going viral, and Ed Campbell made a very reasonable point of saying, well, we're kind of in a post-woke world now, and can you really be politically all-encompassing if you're still using kind of jargony social justice rhetoric, talking about things like social justice, economic justice, right? And I think maybe there is some credence to that. But you look at the kind of way the polls are going at the moment. If all your plan is as a Green Party is to peel off votes from Labour, get Greens from 10 to 15, 16, 17%, get them in the running for the kind of seats that we're seeing from the Liberal Democrats, for example, at the moment, or even, to be honest, if you wanted to get a quarter of the electorate and be fighting amongst the other parties at the top of where people are polling, what 3/4 of the public can hate what you say. 3/4 of the public can think that this is utter woke nonsense for you saying things like social justice. Who cares? You've got the 25% of the electorate that you need to appeal to, which is all you need to be politically relevant right now. And I think that given that social justice rhetoric kind of prima facie is just gone out of the political lexicon, it's been abandoned by every single major party. Even the Liberal Democrats kind of shy away from it. They've been pretty pants on a bunch of stuff like migration and on trans issues, and they've been trying to kind of tiptoe around the edges on this one. The Green Party can really fill the hole of saying, well, hang on a minute, there are loads of people out here who do care about social justice issues. Jeremy Corbyn, in the very famous interview with Jeremy Paxman in the 2017 election, went out of his way to say, I am fighting this election on social justice. Got him 40% of the votes, right? Not that I'm saying everyone was enamored by the rhetoric, right? But it's clearly not so off-putting that you can't do well in an election. It's not totally electorally carcinogenic that it means people won't vote for you if you have incredibly what's the word I'm looking for? Popular, for example, economic positions.
You also have to realise that this is kind of a five-party race. You're not even trying to get 40%. I mean, 25% can get you top of the polls. Now, it's not ideal. I think it just shows how broken first past the post is. But again, I don't think the Green Party needs to be like, right, we need to get 45% of the vote. That's not going to happen.
No.
But they can get 20% in the polls. I think that's possible. And they can get a lot of seats. And we may actually eventually go to PR because we'll never have a stable government if we keep to first past the post. So, I mean, look at the polls now. Reform on top, but they're on what, 27%? No particular party is actually popular, despite Reform saying we're really popular. I think they're just the least hated party with the opinion polls, but no party is actually extremely popular. So if they can peel off 20%, maybe 25% of the vote, that's really, really significant.
It is, and as well, because even if we stick with first past the post, right, what we have in this country is a thing called we have electoral balkanization, right? Voter groups are actually pretty concentrated in certain areas of the country by demographic because of things like demographic shift. Age is a really big predictor of whether you vote left wing or right wing in this country. It's why people will look at saying, well, it's whether you have a degree or not. I mean, it's just that people who are younger are more likely to have a degree, and the age is the skewing in terms of how people vote. In fact, if you take the NRS social grade, pretty terrible measure, but let's just assume that it's okay for now, and you plot ABC1 versus C2DE, and you plot it by age, the lines completely coalesce along each other. They are identical to each other. So class is far less of a predictor of how you vote than it is age, although age is also a class distinction too, but regardless. And because young people have moved into cities, because that's where the jobs are, it's where the universities are, because they've managed to get degrees and they've stuck around in places like Bristol, Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, Liverpool, London, Nottingham, for example, Sheffield. These urban bastions of left-wing vote, it's not rich metropolitan types, it's mostly just young people. And so if you wanted to get the left-wing populist vote, which really a lot of it is concentrated amongst young people, they were the biggest cohort who voted for Jeremy Corbyn, working age people, like the Greens could substantially win a lot of seats in these metropolitan areas just off the back of people abandoning Labour over a load of different things, whether they be economic, social, or geopolitical. So even if you don't get rid of first past post, even if you keep the pretty warped electoral system, getting 20% of the vote for the Greens, getting, broadly ahead of where Labour are, or similar to where Labour are in terms of raw vote share, those will be concentrated specifically in seats that are winnable for the Greens already, and could translate into enough seats that they are going to be prime coalition partners for Liberal Democrats, Scottish National Party, a potential Labour Party, where we have this big fractured electorate in a theoretical election under first past the post as well. So you don't need electoral reform for this appeal to a certain demographic to be useful electorally under first past the post.
Yeah, I think there is a path for the Greens for some electoral success, definitely. But we will move on because it's 8:05. We've got more to cover, but really good conversation. Now, Labour have announced a new trade deal with India, which has caused anger, especially among the right wing. Britain and India have agreed a long-desired trade deal that ministers said would cut tariffs and add £4.8 billion a year due to the UK economy. To the UK economy by 2040. The agreement, which was finalised on Tuesday after more than 3 years of negotiations under successive governments, has long been touted as one of the biggest prizes of Brexit. However, it has caused a row over a decision to exempt Indian workers who have been temporarily seconded to the UK and their employers from national insurance contributions for 3 years. Now, it's this part of the deal which has caused outrage. Indian workers will be exempt from paying national insurance for 3 years. Of course, this has led to the right wing claiming that the government is once again, putting immigrants before British workers. Now, what the deal has attempted to do is offset Trump's tariffs by making essentially a free trade deal with India. The deal is focused on tariff reductions for British and Indian goods across almost all sectors. India's tariffs on British whiskey and gin will be halved from 150% to 75% before reducing to 40% by the 10th year of the deal. Tariffs on British cars will be reduced from about 110% to 10%, with quotas set on the number of British cars that can be exported to India and vice versa. India will cut tariffs across 90% of British product lines, including cosmetics, lamb, salmon, soft drinks, chocolate and biscuits, as well as medical devices, aircraft parts and electrical machinery. Based on 2022 figures, the tariff cuts will be worth £400 million from the day of the deal is implemented. Now, the right wing aren't entirely wrong about this. I mean, this is a neoliberal trade deal. Many of these kinds of deals put British workers in competition with other workers globally, which I find this is extremely ironic because just a few weeks back, Keir Starmer claims that globalisation is over, yet is now happy to announce a deal that puts global capital above anything else. Helena, before we get onto the details of the deal, politically, this must be one of the worst things Labour can announce right now. Local elections showed deep discontent with the status quo. We have right-wing forces often falsely claiming that governments put immigrants before us. Yet Labour have dropped a huge dynamite on it all, essentially gifting the right-wing, politically speaking.
I mean, it just shows you that the coalition of voters that Labour were trying to put together is incredibly fragile, because there is probably a load of people who just want to see trade deals. I know the people who work in the manufacturing sectors for all of these cars or spirits or soft drinks or whatever it is, they're now going to be exportable with tariff-free India. That's something that's going to be good for their jobs. But of course, there are things that get produced in India that we're going to have lower tariffs on now that's going to undercut British workers in the UK and vice versa. So there is some push and pull with regards to how this works, but there are plenty of people in a post-Brexit world who really do want more free trade deals. You know, I mean, for example, the Conservative Party have been the party of free trade forever, and since New Labour have been the party of free trade too, and we've really kind of supported this. And whereas the old school protectionists in this country, they mostly just don't support free trade deals, or they're worried about things like wage arbitrage. Not that necessarily will happen, we'll get into the weeds of that later. The fact that it's been so easy for all of the kind of rogues gallery of right-wing media outlets to go, look at this will mean that there's a national insurance exemption for Indian workers, not going to talk about any of the actual details of this. It's just the worst way that you could possibly do communications, by letting the people who jump the gun on it be right-wing media hacks looking to undermine you. So not only is it bad for them in terms of the people, by trying to appeal to too many different groups of people at once who have different ideas of what a government should do, but also in terms of the way that it can be communicated to the public in a way that the government just doesn't want to. And they should have been beating this to the punch, and they haven't.
I mean, can you explain to me then what Keir Starmer meant by ending globalisation then? Because I thought he was just using it as a buzzword. I don't think he really knew what it meant, or he wanted to signal something. But then again, this kind of flies in the face of it. What was he trying to do beforehand?
I mean, when he meant with globalization is nothing. He didn't know what he meant. He doesn't know what he's talking about. This guy had to have a crash course in how economics works by Lord Falconer on day one of being Labour leader, because he'd never studied it before, didn't have any knowledge of it. That's why all of his claims about the 2017 manifesto being a foundational document didn't have any actual basis in what he believed. He just talked about how great Corbyn was during the election. Should have been one of the warning signs that he didn't really know what he was talking about. When it comes to what he's being primed to say around globalization, is essentially trying to pander to the kind of people in Labour heartlands who didn't like globalization, the people who were supportive of Harold Wilson, for example, when he opposed European common markets and things that they believed to be closer towards a free trade environment. That's what Trump's tariff signified to the Rust Belt Americans who backed Trump in 2016 and in 2024, who believed that broadly things like NAFTA were contrary to the interests of American workers, because this is the same group of workers who also backed Brexit at the time. So he's trying to essentially use this, as you say, as a buzzword to try and bring these groups together, whilst realizing actually, a lot of other people in the Heartland group, in the Tory Heartland areas that we were trying to win over at the last election, they actually do want to see free trade deals. So it's a real kind of catch-22 in terms of what he does or doesn't do. I mean, broadly, I think the trade deal itself looks fine. Personally, I don't have a huge gripe about it, given that there are so many caveats on what this national insurance exemption is, because it's literally only for seconded workers, basically. They can't undercut people because it's specifically around people being moved internally within a company, and they can only be here for a short amount of time. If they wanted a permanent worker, they'd have to get one from the UK. So I don't think the trade deal is necessarily that bad in terms of the fact that actually it's pretty good for a bunch of manufacturing sectors in the UK. It's just depending on which one you want to have as your comparative advantage internationally. It's a different model. It's not a terrible free trade deal, but it certainly flies in the face of things he was saying before about the New World Order being about making everything in Britain and trying to protect British industry in every sector as much as possible, when actually there's a far more nuanced position that the government has taken, which can't be entirely that this can't be put into the idea that globalization has ended. Because then, first of all, because he didn't know what it meant, to be honest. It was just a way of appealing to people through rhetoric rather than through policy.
I mean, this trade deal was standard for your liberal, your neoliberal orthodoxy. And I think when right wing pundits, GB News obviously, say that Keir Starmer hates the British working class and loves immigrants, really, first of all, that's not true, right? Keir Starmer doesn't look at policy and go, how can I screw over the British working class and how can I favour immigrants? Like, what is the incentive there? It's nonsense. Rather, Keir Starmer is quite literally a puppet for capital. And if it just so happens that maybe British workers can get screwed over, it's not in favour of other immigrants. It's simply because he is just continuing the sort of free trade neoliberal orthodoxy. It's essential that. And I think there is probably conversation around economic protectionism. I mean, I think blanket tariffs are wrong. I'm also not sure. I think, Francis Fukuyama, the end of history guy, I think he's wrong about free trade everywhere. This is being the perfect thing. There's clearly issues here. But I find it very interesting that the Brexiteers, who are probably the ones attacking this the most, did they not get what they wanted? I mean, they wanted free trade deals outside the EU galore, and this is one of them, right?
I mean, well, that's the problem, is that there was a lot of snake oil being sold to Brexit voters throughout the campaign. There was a lot of snake oil on both sides of the aisle, to be honest. But it was funny that a bunch of the Brexiteers who were front and centre of the campaign to leave the European Union, as you say, wanted free trade deals elsewhere. They weren't necessarily opposed to free trade prima facie, they were opposed to it within the European Union. But if you are somebody who opposes free trade broadly around the realms of wage arbitrage, that's what you want to minimize. You want to minimize the idea that free trade allows companies to use workers outside the UK to try and minimize their costs, for example. That's far worse in a bunch of trade deals that we have with countries in the global south, where they do pay their workers a lot less, and is actually a lot better with a free trade deal with the with the European Union, for example, in the UK, because EU workers earn a lot more than workers in the global south. Therefore, wage arbitrage, that's a lot harder. It's much harder to be undercut by a European worker because they're used to the higher wages of being in the imperial core already. So that's obviously a big issue with regards to how that campaign was fought on. But a lot of people just voted to leave the EU because they wanted to go back to a pre-common markets era kind of Labour type policy, which I don't think is necessarily possible in the world that we live in. I don't think globalization has ended. I don't think it will go away either. I think the Biden administration's strategy of broader free trade, but we have specific protectionist tariffs on these specific industries that we want to make sure that we become a world leader on, or that we want to protect our workers on, such as the automotive industry, such as green technology, and then use industrial subsidy to make sure that these particular industries are as well funded as possible. That's the kind of policy that I would support. But you're right, a bunch of workers just wanted free trade to end just completely, and I don't think that was ever going to be a thing that was happening. Whereas I think what's important to understand is that when it came to the EU, there's a lot of the Remain Leave divide. A lot of this was just corporations and CEOs and business owners who would benefit from only looking internally within the UK. You look at Weatherspoon, for example, who want to ensure that cheap lager from the continent doesn't undercut their ability to be able to be the one who is the who can force down prices of British booze in the UK, right? They were going to benefit from Brexit by being only marketable in the UK because they don't operate in Europe, versus people who have a lot of trade with Europe, right? So breaking off the UK from the EU was only beneficial in terms of the way in which it would change trade dynamics, in terms of geopolitics, in terms of the way those businesses would operate, rather than what it would do for
I mean,
workers.
you had you had
If you know what I mean.
capital on either side, though. There was never. I mean, I
Yes,
tried to
exactly.
explain to during the referendum. I tried to explain to people that there is no anti-establishment vote here. There is capital on either side. There are those that want to remain because, what's the word I'm looking for? Stability is really good for businesses. There's a lot of capital wanting to remain. But of course, yeah, you've got the Weatherspoons people who are like, we want the sort of end to red tape kind of trade deals and rip up the regulations and all those sorts of things. And basically, trading with countries, which is a race to the bottom. There was capital on either side. And I think for most people, though, the globalization to them is just ending immigration and keeping Britain British. That's kind of it, really. But it's not as simple as just ending globalization. I don't think can be done. I also don't think it's what the left wants as well. I think this kind of globalization we have is not good, but globalization in itself isn't a bad thing. I also think that Biden's trade policies. I thought Biden's trade policies were pretty positive as well. I thought that was the right approach.
I think one of the things worth pointing out as well is that there is a lot of discussion about the idea of immigrants depressing people's wages, for example. And whilst that can certainly be true in some sectors, broadly, an increase in demand therefore warrants an increase in supply as well, right? Immigrants both compete in the job market, but also purchase commodities within the economy, right? So it shifts both the demand and the supply curve up. The issue, of course, is that a lot of people who see industry being undermined in a free trade world, which is true, and the move towards a service economy, which is also true, they have this false consciousness where they believe that the manufacturing jobs are the good jobs because they were better paid than service jobs. When in reality, this is correlation causation fallacy because no, actually, service industry jobs aren't necessarily worse paid. We just happened to transition to a service economy when all the unions were kneecapped, when we lost union bargaining power. There's a really great statistic that Matt Bruenig pointed out, which is that McDonald's workers in Denmark earn more than Honda workers in America. Yeah, because they have better trade unions and a better trade union relationship than they do in the United States. That's why they get paid more. It wasn't necessarily the manufacturing jobs that were good jobs, it was the unionized jobs that were good jobs. And Dean Baker, as an American economist, he's done a lot of good work in terms of how we have tried to blame a bunch of other factors for what is really fundamentally a decline in trade union participation. Because globalization's worked absolutely fine for Norway, for Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, right? Countries where you do have good labour bargaining rights. Immigration in Germany was higher per capita than in the UK, even during the Blair boom mass migration years. And they haven't had the per capita drop in GDP in terms of how much people earn in Germany as we have had here. They've continually increased GDP per capita during the period of mass migration where we had it stagnated. So I don't think there's necessarily this one-to-one causation factor in terms of immigrants driving down wages, because there are so many other factors that go into it.
And if you think that immigrants are driving down wages, there is a solid answer to that, which Helena has said. Stronger unions. You want stronger unions. It's quite simple. Now, before we move on to our last story, just saying if you're enjoying the show, then please like the stream. And if you're not a subscriber, then hit that button. If you want to see us grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Alternatively, you can become a YouTube member for just 99p. And remember, all 5 of us at Turn Left are volunteers. We do not get paid for this. We do have a very small amount of income, a couple £100 a month, but that goes to technology, it goes to train tickets, to basically bring the content that you want to see. So you have already helped so much, whether it's Vox Pops, whether it's covering rallies, whether it's interviews. And at the end of the month, we've got something really, really exciting coming up. I'm not going to reveal what it is because we're in talks, but it's going to be big. And again, that can only happen because of you guys. Remember, don't put yourself out though, only if you can. If you can't afford to give us any money, don't worry. All you need to do is watch us, comment on our streams, talk about us in real life. If you're having conversations with people, talk to them about Turn Left. Talk to them about socialism and a better politics. Now, on to our final story. India and Pakistan have broken out into a war after India carried out strikes in Pakistan this morning. Parts of Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir were rocked by multiple missile attacks by India earlier on Wednesday morning. Pakistan's military said Indian missiles struck 6 cities. That included 4 different places in Punjab province, the first time that India has hit Pakistan's most populous state since the 1971 war between the neighbours. The remaining 2 places targeted were Muzaffarabad and Kotli, both in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Now, why did this happen? Well, 2 weeks ago, a terrorist attack happened in Kashmir by a Pakistani militant group. India has claims that the militant group is backed by the Pakistani state, which Pakistan denies. So far, there hasn't been an abundance of evidence for this claim. And Pakistan has claims that so far, 26 people have been killed. And it is very much expected that Pakistan will retaliate. Now, to me, given that there is no concrete evidence that the attack in Kashmir was backed by the Pakistani state, doesn't mean it didn't happen. You know, it's an ongoing development. Then India may have committed a war crime. I mean, it's certainly a breach of international law if they've done it unprompted. And, you know, this feels in a way maybe similar to Israel-Palestine, kind of. I can see some parallels. You know, Britain came in with the partition in 1947, divided India into India-Pakistan, thanks to the British help. There has been tension between the 2 states for decades. And I suppose it's worth noting that India is a big supporter of Israel too. But yeah, we will keep you updated on this story as it develops. But I think it's time to bring in our producer. I know you've got some good comments in the chat. Let's have a look. Yes, we can. Oh, thank you so much. Much appreciated. Thank you, Specs. Oh, very generous today. Okay, we can't hear you. Sorry, let me sort this out for you. This happens every single time, doesn't it? I know why. I'm going to replace you. Where are you, Lewis? There you go. You're here. You're here. Sorry about that. No. Apparently people saying you still can't hear you. Yeah, I mean you're in the layer, so that should.
And it
be
says
fine.
blue. You're coming up as blue on the.
Yeah. Do you want to quickly leave and come back? This keeps happening. One day we're going to get some better software, I think, but this is the best we've got so far.
Or at least it's software that works on my PC now.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we've fixed one person. It's just now Lewis. And I have to say the quality on your end is looking really, really good because when you come on, usually it's a bit blurry because I know your PC can handle it. But right. I think they should hear you now.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Let's wait for a comment quickly. Hello, everyone.
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you, Lewis. They're gaslighting you. I don't think they were. I think no. We're all good. Right. Okay. That was smooth sailing.
Okay, lovely. Right, I'll start from the top. So Novel did put this, and I just want to address obviously why we didn't obviously have a massive discussion about it. So obviously Novel was really looking forward to the Pakistani and India story because obviously it is a developing story and there's so much kind of history there. I think obviously it's better to wait to kind of see what happens, to see if it like either escalates or doesn't from where it's at right now, to have like a bigger and wider discussion about this topic, and obviously find somebody who's probably very good at this topic, because we'd only want to really talk about this with actual people who are, you know, interested in this history. And
Yeah.
Novel, if that's you, obviously send us a message, let us know if you know more about this, we can get you on to talk about it. And if anybody's got any interesting things that we could be reading about this in the meantime, please just point it out in the chat and we can have a look. Okay, so going from the top again, Specs. So they were talking about the elections in Wales and the Senedd coming up. The comments are not in any particular order at the moment right now, so we're just going to go through them. But I did see this polling actually, and it would be interesting to see what you guys think about this. I saw polling basically showing that Plaid Cymru and Reform are leading in Wales, and just to add in there as well, another poll I think came out, I think it was this morning that I saw, showing that the Reform are now ahead of Labour in Scotland too. So they're going after obviously the different parts of the country now.
Yeah, I saw the poll. There was one poll which had Plaid ahead and another poll, I think, Reform ahead. I saw that poll and immediately messaged my best mate. He lives in Abergavenny. Abergavenny? He used to be Merthyr. I think that's how you pronounce it. And I immediately said, you have to vote Plaid. You have to vote Plaid. I already do, he says. I already do. So,
it's proportional representation. I mean, it's STV, so you can vote Green if you want.
Well, yeah, true. But I think he supports Plaid anyway.
I mean, if you want to specifically ensure that Plaid come first in the Senedd elections, so that you can make sure they're the ones choosing their coalition partners to be able to govern with, then that makes sense. But you know, I still think that as long as you can ensure that there is a progressive majority in terms of the overall vote share, even if Reform UK came first, they wouldn't have enough coalition partners to govern, and it would likely be a three-way Plaid, Green and Labour coalition running the Senedd if there was if the kind of polls we're seeing were to come true.
So 2 progressives and a Conservative Party in coalition.
I mean, the Welsh Labour are...
The Welsh Labour aren't too bad.
I have my reservations with Ellen Morgan, but certainly better than Vaughan Gethin, but nowhere near as good as Mark Drakeford. We stand.
No, yeah, we stand Mark.
It's always worth noting, and I like to note this when we talk about polls, is that usually when you click into them and go into the data, it's somewhere in the region of around 30, sometimes up to 45% of people who literally say don't know. That doesn't look good when on a headline, so they always exclude those ones usually. So it's always worth noting as well. We got some lovely comments. Curtis looking absolutely fantastic in black. But I'm going to one-up that with Jamie saying Helena for PM.
I second that. Zach Plansky, step aside.
And then Becca coming in with some more compliments. Glad to see Helena back. It's been a while. Nice to have another woman on too. And then on to Polanski. So, loving all the Polanski exposure. I've got a half a brass eyes. I think it's also... Obviously, you know...
Sorry, can you just read out his name as well? He's commented before. Baron
von Cockslap.
You know what? I'm gonna come out on this one. I think the Hypnoboob story is great for one thing. It's gonna go viral, and people will know who Zach Polanski is. Any publicity is good publicity.
Do you think? Do you think the politics is, though? I think I made this point before.
If Nigel Farage can become Prime Minister, having been on fucking Cameo saying "Hawk tour on your bussy as it claps," then I'm sure a 2013 misstep where Zach Polanski talked about hypnoboobs is that's going to be water under the bridge, right? If it's Zach Polanski versus Nigel Farage in the Commons, you know.
I've seen the Lib Dem activists on Twitter trying to really stick it in him, and it's like, you do realise he owns it. I don't think he even cares himself that much.
No, like who the fuck cares? But I mean, it's gonna be again, if it gets you talking about you, then like who the fuck cares at this point? As long as you have a good rebuttal for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, as well, we go out of our way to try and sometimes talk about stories which are not necessarily either in the mainstream or not being covered in the right way or enough. But, you know, going back to things what like Owen Jones was saying, I think back in February, and what Lewis Goodall was saying, is that if the Greens want to be in the news more and want to be talked about more, then they have to make news. And that's exactly what Zach's doing. So
Zach himself knew this.
Yeah, exactly. On to obviously conversations around anti-Semitism. So Sig Is that like a I don't
Yeah.
I finally watched the Labour Files last night. Really put the whole anti-Semitism thing to bed for me. Yeah, it is a really interesting.
That is, I mean, the Labour Files. I'm sure every person has seen it who's watching now. It is an absolutely incredible documentary, and I think like even if you know the story behind it, if you haven't seen it, it's such a brilliant documentary, and it is quite shocking actually. Still shocks me.
Yeah, as well. And there's the article and book as well. That I think was it Anushka Astana, I think, who wrote
Yeah,
it.
The Guardian, right?
Yeah, the article's called like Corbyn flew too close to the cuckoo's nest or something like that. And she's basically
She
kind
could
of
have written it 5 years earlier, but
yeah,
that is The Guardian for you.
yeah, basically explaining how Morgan McSweeney, literally from the day of Jeremy Corbyn having his massive success in 2017, was it 2017, 40% of the vote, I think. That's when he started planning and plotting, and she
So me and Helena covered this actually together a while back about Morgan McSweeney literally plotted to bring down the Canary, and obviously I used to work for Canary, so I was quite interested in that story. I actually now found out that Morgan McSweeney coordinated with Rachel Riley. So Rachel Riley tried to take the Canary to court, I think, or whatever, over anti-Semitism. Now this does predate me, right? But of course, Rachel Riley was a big Corbyn skeptic, should I say, and often attacked the left a lot. And yeah, she claimed that basically the Canary was anti-Semitic. It was the Canary is regulated by Impress, and Impress found that actually the Canary was not anti-Semitic. It had some anti-Israel views that could be seen as offensive, which is, I don't know, what, calling out for Israel for the war crimes. That's, of course, offensive to some. But yeah, no, I think there was a recent development. I can't find the source now. I'll have to go back and find it, where Morgan McSweeney was actually in contact with Rachel Riley to at least publicise her beef with the Canary. And of course, he absolutely despised the Canary.
there's so many layers to it. And Edward as well. Hello, Edward, as always. Good to see Zach not taking any shit from the Jewish Chronicle. And correct me if I'm wrong as well in terms of the Jewish Chronicle's credibility, which we know it has very little. But I think it's the Jewish Chronicle itself, wasn't it, who was caught up in the Israel scandal a few months ago, where Benjamin Netanyahu's advisor within his office was...
Did he lie about his CV to get into the Jewish Chronicle?
No, I think it's the same guy, but it's a different story. Right. They were leaking false information to the press to mislead the public on the war so it could continue. They released that fake story about the hostages being taken into Egypt so they could manufacture consent to continue the war. And then it turned out to be false, and they leaked it on purpose. And that person is now indicted and currently being still investigated by Israeli authorities for leaking that story to the Jewish Chronicle because it has no credibility. Obviously, on the same topic, Noffel again. Always hear about Corbyn and anti-Semitism in the news. Never hear about Farage privatising the NHS. Yeah, absolutely true. The way they pick and choose to cover things.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say cleverly, but who was it wasn't Sophie Ridge, the one with dark hair, Beth Rigby? I had an interview with Beth Rigby shortly after the local elections. He says, I don't think that the NHS should be funded by taxpayers. Another model, right? That is literally privatisation. He didn't say the word privatisation, but it's privatisation. Of course, him and Rupert Lowe has said in the past they want an insurance-based model. I think it's better for the newspapers, though, to bring down Jeremy Corbyn than it is to Nigel Farage. So I think we know the answers to why they talk about one over the other.
Yeah, and
well, it's like what I said was like what Gary Stevenson points out. So they're trying to flood the airways with stuff that's erroneous or is about culture wars or whatever it is, to stop you talking about the real issues, to stop you talking about wealth taxes, about the gap between the rich and the poor, anything to be able to divert the message away from the central theme of what Corbyn's campaign was, which was to deal with the imbalances in society.
Yeah. Which Corbyn successfully navigated in 2017 to get the media to talk about the policies.
Yeah, I think it was the Nuffield Foundation a couple of months ago released a report basically explaining that if we had adopted a French model to our current system, it would cost on average about £50 billion more a year than we currently spend on healthcare. So it wouldn't even work anyway. But then again, most reform voters that I speak to, and this is not just even an insult or just a generalization, it's fact. I've spoken to thousands of them over the last couple of years. They genuinely have no idea what the policies are, most of them. Literally no clue.
My dad literally voted reform So after the local elections, I was talking to him, and he goes, "I voted Reform," and I was like, "Why?" And he said, "Because Labour privatising the NHS. I'm sick of both the parties." And I was like, "Right, first of all, Dad, I need to tell you that Nigel Farage really, really wants to privatise the NHS." And he sort of said, "Well, look, I mean, it's just going to be a local election vote. I don't know if I'm going to vote for them in the general election." But I tried making that point foolishly on Twitter, actually, to say, look, this was in response to one of the new Labour MP intakes who've just attacked trans people and immigration, right? And he said, we need to listen to immigration or the concerns about immigration. And I made that point saying, look, my dad, who's voted Labour, Conservative, Green, he's voted for all the parties. He voted Reform on that basis. Nothing to do with immigration, nothing to do with culture war stuff, right? Obviously, he's brown like me. And it was a deep-seated anger with the two-party system. And that is a really important point to make. And I think that is what's missing. And I think part of it is obviously not understanding the policies of Reform. But most of it to me is that they're so angry at the status quo, which to me means that Reform are not uncatchable. I mean, some of their loyal supporters absolutely are. But there's a bunch of Reform voters we can easily bring back.
And the issue is like you need a really good, strong communicator to really take them on, and no one in the big parties really has that in any way. But also, when it comes to speaking to these people, they might occasionally know like a tagline, like, "Oh, they're gonna increase the tax threshold to 20,000." I'll be like, "That's a statement. That's not a policy. What is the policy? How is that going to work?" And then no one's ever got past that point in a single conversation with me. They don't understand how anything that they think Reform is going to do. They don't know how it's going to work. Helena, I'm going to kind of maybe put you on the spot because I feel like you will know this. Callum did explain this to me the other day, but how does the Green Party leadership work in terms of Zach running for leader? Because Graham's put, how does it work with Zach running for leader with the Green Party, with having two leaders? Does he become third? How does that whole thing work?
So there's nothing saying specifically the Green Party has to have two leaders. During the leadership election, though, people will run on joint ballots as joint potential co-leaders, right? So at the last leadership election, the three options were Carla and Adrian, and then second there was another pairing, which was Amelia Womack and someone in my chat told me the name of, who I've already forgotten, and Shahra Ali was another person who ran to be the leader at that point, right, on a single person ticket. So you just run on the ticket that you want to run on, and then whoever wins on that ticket becomes either leader or co-leaders at the time, whenever that election is over and whoever wins. So there's nothing specific about the Green Party that means it has to have co-leaders. It just happens to be that there's mostly been people running for leader who run on joint tickets, and the people who run on joint tickets have usually won as well.
And it's also worth noting that even at the minimum, the Conservatives have some sort of process to change their leader, and the Labour Party don't. There is literally no process, really. It's just like public pressure, essentially, or pressure from the party to get a leader to eventually step down. It's quite undemocratic, actually. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Almost a good argument for mandatory reselection.
Mm-hmm. Something we should have had back in 2017 or 2018. If only. How different politics could be. I mean, it could be exactly the same, but I'm thinking how different politics could be if we managed to get open selection in the Labour Party.
How difficult politics have been if Angela Rayner's coup of Keir Starmer had been successful in 2021, right?
True.
I can't
get over that. I cannot get over that she was ballsy enough to do that, if I'm honest, because I didn't think she would.
I did a video about this today, actually, about Angela Rayner, because I'm basically saying, where is she at the moment? My speculative guess would be that I think they're holding her back essentially because they don't want her to build her profile up in public. And on top of that, we had that story recently where it said that Rayner was going to quit because of this impossible target of 1.5 million homes, and a lot of people believe that she's been given that target to essentially set her up for failure. So if she does challenge Keir Starmer to the leadership, they can be like, "Well, you're doing a terrible job at this first department that you're in charge of. How can you be leader?" While also not really giving her much press coverage recently. She's barely ever on.
And it fails on two fronts too, because the people who want to see the homes built will think of her as a failure if they don't build those homes and meet that target. And there are a bunch of people who don't want the homes to get built because they're all a bunch of NIMBYs who are negatively polarised against Department for Housing communities already. And on that, even because I think they do want this target to get here, in terms of how they are divvying up resources in that particular department. Whenever they have a housing question, the person who they send out to do the media is Matthew Pennycook, not Angela Rayner. Pennycook is the one who's being given most of the brief, and not Rayner, because they're trying to essentially make sure that, as far as they are concerned, only the adults get their hands on the fucking toys. I've previously described Angela Rayner's treatment by the Politburo as like inviting the child up to the adults table and then continually pulling the chair out when she tries to sit down.
Yeah.
Not to say that she is a child, because she isn't. She's a politician in her own right. She's a successful care worker, a successful trade union shop steward, somebody who was tipped potential for leadership from very, very early on. And, until she was a traitor, I was a big fan of her, But the way in which that she's perceived by the Politburo is that because she has these links to the left wing of the party, she is perceived to not be the adult in the room, which is why they don't give her enough of what would be a relevant kind of remit in terms of government business, because they don't trust that she would do the right thing because she's not from their team, from their clique. It's real fucking, for all of their protestations that they are the adults in the room, that they are grown up politicians, they act like fucking school bullies. They really do.
They are just a bunch of bastards, aren't they? When I hear that, all I'm thinking is, why aren't you fixing the problems in this country? But they care more about these internal battles because they're a bunch of, to quote Owen Jones, soulless bastards.
Dead behind the eyes, yeah, literally. All they know is how to destroy. Literally, all they know is how to destroy.
And that's why they're gonna keep doing it to themselves. There's gonna be the fight within the Blairites because.
Or when the 2026 locals happen and Labour get battered on their own turf rather than on the Tories' turf, which is what these local elections were, then the knives are going to really come for Keir Starmer's jugular.
It's going to be see it.
Oh, it's gonna be filthy, and I await every single moment of backstabbing for those absolute bastards.
100%. I will eat
West Streeting's already got that knife ready. He's already got the knife ready.
Yeah, but I reckon Bridget Phillipson does as well. Even more so now. She's going to get sacked apparently.
Yeah, I saw that. But I'll ask you a question though with Rayner. You were just saying, before she basically let herself down, is Rayner redeemable if she went for leadership? Could she bring the Labour Party back to where it is, or is she too complicit in this current government?
Could she, in kind of a holistic sense, in a kind of more non-partisan sense, be able to make the Labour Party successfully appealing to the public again? I think so. I think she could do that. Could she be appealing to me? Never again. No, I'm sorry. What this government has done to trans people, what this people has done to the poorest in society, I don't think anyone who's been a part of this cabinet can ever expunge that spot. I'm sorry. It's indelible.
I agree. I think she definitely could have broader support and electorally do better. For me, though, I don't think I could vote Labour ever again. They could go back to a genuine social democratic manifesto. Still won't vote for them. One, even tactically, because I would still want to vote for the left of the party to keep them in check. But I couldn't vote for these bastards ever again. For me, I want the party to die. That's what I want.
Well, we'll see what the future brings, because those knives are ready to take down Keir Starmer.
I could see myself support him again, but only if there's like a top-down demolition of everything that has become
it would have
under
to be
Keir Starmer.
very radically different.
They'd have to have like a kind of catastrophic wipeout at the next election, apart from in all the seats where all of the MPs who we don't think are bellends are still, so that they could be able to put into place a new leadership and a new framework and a new kind of like party apparatus that isn't as toxically awful as what currently exists, right? That's how much would have to get done to the Labour Party for me not to feel dirty supporting them,
I don't think it can happen, though.
We'll have to see. I'll move on to the last comments very quickly, because we're going to end this section. But Graham has said, finally someone who explains international trade in a way I can understand. The price of a beer. That's how it should be done. And Edward Sexby again, let's be real here. How many vacancies are in the UK, especially in the NHS? We have a huge skills shortage in this country. And obviously this is in reference to when you guys were talking about the Indian trade deal. I
just want to make a really important point. We want to make an important point about migration and tax in this country, whilst we're on the subject of the potential of wage arbitrage and things like that. In this country, politicians have not been straight with the population over the necessity for immigration. Obviously, we talked about the aging population a lot on this show. I know Zoe Gardner's talked a lot about it. But the only kind of mainstream political figure I've seen talk about it is Rory Stewart on Question Time, in terms of the kind of mainstream media. In a country where not only are people living longer, the cohort of people who are living longer is bigger than the cohort of people who are still working. Tax will have to go up to pay for these people's social security, not just pensions, but healthcare. So if you do not have a big enough working age cohort of people to support them, the economy is going to fucking collapse. The economy will not be sustainable. And we have continually told ourselves that we can maintain the same tax rate. And if taxes are going up, it's because the government wants to be communistly taxing and spending, as these people would put it, rather than adapting our tax base for the needs of the modern demographics in this country. If you want to expand the working age population to support an older population without increasing taxes, then you're going to have to either increase the birth rate or increase migration. And an increasing birth rate won't pay dividends for another 20 years until these people start working and increasing our productive capacity. There is a ticking demographic time bomb coming in terms of what happens when the biggest cohort, which is boomers, start retiring. Because the first lot of boomers are just retiring right now, and the big age kind of spike in the population period is just coming up to retirement age soon. That's going to hollow out our productive capacity hugely. And if we cut migration to appease what is obviously a majority opinion in this country, I'm not saying that I'm popular in saying this. I think most people want to see immigration come down. But if we appease that, there is going to be economic consequences for it that will not only kill growth, but could also send our economy into freefall due to not being able to continue servicing our national debt. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want working people to get taxed more to pay for pensioners. I would like immigration to be able to do that. But young people who think that competing with immigrants is the problem, rather than competing with pensioners for national resources, do not understand the scale of this problem, and they're being sold snake oil. So you may not like immigration, you may not like the cultural problems with it, whatever that happens, I have a different opinion to you. But fundamentally, the economic reality is if we cut immigration, taxes will have to go up, and our economy will be worse for it.
And if we want to focus on the birth rate part, right, if you actually want to increase the birth rate, right, we are going to have to fundamentally change how wealth is distributed in this country, how obviously wealth is taxed for the wealthiest, and how people are remunerated through their work. And obviously the key to that, you guys already mentioned it earlier, is obviously things like unions. But even unions, even though they are obviously a powerful and useful tool that we have, we fundamentally need the people at the top as well to be a part of that journey, into backing them, into again, I'll give this person credit where it's due. Like Joe Biden, he was quite pro-union, and he was the first president to ever be on a picket line. Like, these are the types of things that you'd like to see from a leader, because that's fundamentally one of the ways that you're going to change how wealth is distributed in this country. And we're not going to see any change in birth rates until people feel way better off and feel more comfortable.
It's why as well. I mean, if there's anyone who is watching who's sympathetic to reform or votes for reform or thinking about it, there might not be many of you here, but if you are, I'm telling you right now, reform is not going to meaningfully reduce immigration if they win. They're not going to do that. If you want to do that, you have to drastically change the way the economy works. And right now, the economy serves the corporations, the multimillionaires, and the billionaires, the constituent that reform essentially supports. If you want to reduce immigration meaningfully, you have to change a lot of things. They are not going to do that. So I'm telling you right now, if immigration is one of the things you want to support reform on, you are going to be severely disappointed. I guarantee it. They're not going to reduce immigration meaningfully in a way that you think it should be reduced.
Absolutely. And that is the last of the comments. So thank you so much, guys.
Okay. Well, that was really good. Thank you for all your comments, and thank you so much for your donations, but that is all we have time for. I want to thank our viewers who tuned in. Of course, I want to thank Helena for joining me tonight. Once again, expert analysis. Remember to like the stream if you haven't. And if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button. If you want to see us grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly, or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Alternatively, you could become a YouTube member for just 99p. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Curtis Daly, and I will see you next time.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.